So why is our perception of multiple dimensions limited? I mean, why aren't we just aware that we're in them?
Here we are talking about being multidimensional again, because we can be, and it's time. We're ready to perceive as much as we possibly can of the freedom of how we can interact, and we'll say with other dimensions, while remaining, I'm going to say, tethered, connected to Earth, connected to the ground. This is all possible.
But so you see, I believe that our multidimensional existence is sort of hidden from us while we're here on Earth, because it's part of what we're here to discover. I believe we're here to learn through a limited perspective and simultaneously learn how to release those boundaries that do limit our awareness.
And that's a big part of moving from connection to access. You know, certainly in reconnective healing, we have such a simple and tangible pipeline, if you will, between energy, light, and information, the intelligence of the reconnective healing frequencies, and us as receivers. And it's quite noticeable, tangible. But connection is one stage, phase in a sequence of unfoldings. And definitely the point in which we're able to access, we'll say, the multidimensional perception. And remember, we are existing in a half-second delay. Our brain is developed and constructed and designed really to perceive not a now moment, but what we know from neuroscience is really the half-second delay of perception. So we talk about this a lot. If I touch Eric's nose and his toe at the same time, well, you explain.
Well, all right. So if you have something come into contact with your nose, which is close to your brain, that signal will get to your brain faster, minutely faster, but definitely faster, than if someone or something touched your toe. That time to travel would be longer, but the brain doesn't receive them as two different impulses. The brain pauses receiving the impulse from the nose until the impulse from the toe arrives, so then we have the simultaneous experience of them.
Right. So Eric's perception of me touching his nose wasn't a now moment, and it was a half-second delay, because in reality, in our perceivable reality, and that's a super important concept, our perceivable reality, quite different from our reality. The brain, for some beautiful reason and by design only, has to coalesce with our sensations. And this is another part of why maybe perceiving or becoming multidimensional is a little tricky, because we are built in a what? Multi-sensory body, but it isn't transsensory all the time.
Right. It's not transcensory or transsensory. And you see, part of it again is that 0.5 second delay is an earthly experience.
Yes.
But when we leave here, this awareness, for instance, when we interact with the reconnective healing frequencies, we find ourselves on a scalar or infinitely multidimensional existence. Now we appear to be existing in perfect sync with when things are occurring. So time here is an illusion for multiple reasons in multiple ways. And again, I do believe that part of it is a learning process, even if it's a learning of integration. Even the way we're coordinated our physical body. You know, if I were to take two fingers about an inch or two apart and touch you on your back, it would feel like one point. If I were to take two fingers an inch apart and touch you on the back of your hand or on your finger, you would clearly recognize those are two different points. We have far more sensation. Our nerves are very close together on our hands and our fingers because we do a lot with that. And that's what allows us, for example, to read Braille. Couldn't read Braille with your back. You wouldn't have that distinction.
Right.
So there are multiple limitations that we have that are part of a design, and it only therefore makes sense if that's in our physical design to experience through limitation and expansion. Then it's also part of our time awareness to learn through this limited perspective of existence.
Now, I think I'm not actually going to think about this.
Okay.
I'm going to experience it. We have a opportunity when we're not in what we'll call a gravity-bound body. And astronauts talk about this a lot. You know, an overview effect. When we send our astronauts to the International Space Station and they leave planet Earth and they are 250 miles beyond the planet Earth, their ability to be able to perceive, looking back at Earth, a unity, a oneness, what many of them will purport is a multi-sensory, multi-dimensional understanding. And I bring in the word understanding because sometimes we have to, again, move beyond ourselves to see ourselves. You've heard me say that before. And most definitely, when we are talking about perception, we have to be willing to recognize perception, as Eric explained, has to catch up with us. That's how the brain, again, was designed. But when we leave Earth, okay, and that is an interesting component, something in the brain releases, something outside of gravity, and I would say something within the particle wave relationship of our actual function, anatomy. Every cell starts to orient or reorient itself in a different way, so it's communicating in a different way, and so on and so on. Can we do that through and with the intelligence of energy, light, and information? And that doesn't require us to go to a visit to the International Space Station or even to float in what we'll call an anti-gravity environment, maybe one of the flotation tanks, in order to actually alter what we are able to perceive or how we are able to perceive ourselves and others.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we were talking recently about flotation tanks and the way that they're really sensory deprivation tanks. So we float, we feel the awareness, the interaction of our molecular substance floating in another molecular substance, and then we cut off sound and light, and we really expand our awareness out there. And more gets taken in by us consciously, and some of that gets brought back into our everyday life. But you know, we go through something different yet similar when we talk about the overview effect.
Yes.
When we leave this environment, this gravity, and there's an awareness that comes about. You speak to people who have experienced that. They look down at Earth, and suddenly the concept of us all becoming one becomes very real. Now, why am I repeating that point that Jillian made? Because I want to tie it into something that just came to me now.
Right.
Which is, maybe it's our inability to view from that perspective while we're here that contributes to a lot of the ways we experience prejudice. Maybe we don't see the unity and the oneness in us, that we are all one.
Yes.
And that allows us to feel fear, and fear responds in a way from hatred, prejudice, separation. Now, I'm going to give you an example of fear at a lighter point for a moment. Sometimes when we talk about being multidimensional, the concept comes up also, as you touched on, is people say, well, is it safe? How do I stay tethered to our own dimension? Really, tethering, tying, is that something we want? I don't. Is it safe? I think when we experience, I know when we experience the reconnective healing frequencies, we leave here, and the one thing we don't experience is fear. Fear leading to any of its offshoots, be it hatred, prejudice, anger, or anything else. There's no reason there that we would even think about tethering because we know that where we are is where we are. So it's actually here that we're tethered to a perception that is not the fullness of who we are, but is, I believe, an elected experience.
Yes. And on a molecular level, we are a subject of gravity. We are not in gravity. We are actually its subject. It is a force greater than, we'll say, us on multiple levels. So keep in mind, from a perception standpoint, you're spinning around on the outside of planet Earth, tethered to its outer atmosphere, if you will. That's the grounding, okay? So it's important to recognize the difference between grounding and ungrounding, or lack thereof of ground. But again, that's quite different when we're looking at how we can perceive our simultaneous, again, multidimensional access. And I want to bring us back. Connection and connection to our grounding cord is quite important for us to be able to perceive, I'm going to say, 4D life. We need to be able to perceive height, width, depth, and time, or we're going to feel awkward. We're going to have a variety of physical imbalances that may not be very comfortable, vertigo, and many other things. So the question is, can we perceive both? And in our access to what we'll call a multidimensional interaction, we know with energy, light, and information, we can eyes wide open, be in full awareness of how we are receiving something that is outside of 4 dimensions. That is, I'm going to say, dimension free. It is all dimensions. It is omnidirectional.
Right.
It is not subject to gravity. And yet at the same time, we are absolutely capable of receiving its totality, the totality of its expression. So it's innate with reconnective healing. You're already learning it.
So
without your cognitive mind.
What I find interesting about this is when people come back from space travel, they bring that expanded awareness back with them. They don't just experience there, but they come back here and they have a different perspective.
Yes.
When people have, for example, a life after death or a near-death experience, they come back here with that expanded awareness and perception. Now, it's not that either the astronaut or the person who had the NDE doesn't come back into earthly life and find that we fall back into some of our limited perspectives or patterns or prejudices or other things at times, but we also have a greater awareness that allows us to pull ourselves back out of it simply with the reminder, the self-reminder of what there is and that there is more. And yet, or I should say, and also, this is the experience with the reconnective healing frequencies. Once we experience this, we find that our life changes. The way we interact with other people changes. The way we perceive other people changes. And the way even we perceive ourselves changes and evolves. Now, are we always in it? No. Or I should actually change that. Say, are we always aware of this? No. The frequencies are always with this, but we're not always wakefully, consciously, cognizantly aware of that state. And sometimes it helps that we bring about reminders, be they mental, emotional reminders, or be they even a sensation awareness, a reminder that brings us back in. But once we interact with any of these experiences we've talked about, we truly are forever changed. And it's sort of like a re-dipping as we re-experience it. It doesn't have to come from plant medicines or from having to, journey 3 hours a day for 30 days or anything else. And yet it still requires a reminder because in a sense you could say we are walking between two worlds.
Frequency and our bandwidth. And I like to think of reconnective healing as a bandwidth because as a receiver, as the instrument for the reconnective healing intelligence, we are its instrument. And we are receivers by design. So those two components are a reminder that we have become in a more expanded bandwidth. We've become a multidimensional bandwidth. Now, whether we want all channels opened so that they're perceptible in every interaction that we have in our daily life, well, the more we become, I'm going to say, untethered to the need or fear of being tethered, the more choice, the more freedom we have with this intelligence, with the sequence of what reconnective healing is bringing to us and through us. So I like to think of it as an unlimited bandwidth. We're getting really comfortable with that on a technology level, right? We're getting really comfortable with that in this very intellectualized or almost ideological paradigm. We need to recognize that it doesn't have to be complicated, right?
It's not. And something else that came to me now that you and I were discussing the other day is the understanding, as Solomon speaks about,
Yes.
In the book Solomon Speaks on Reconnecting Your Life, is that we are each an instrument. We are each our own instrument, and we are learning to play ourselves, to tune ourselves, to play ourselves. And part of what that learning is, I believe, is coming back to an awareness. Is it something that we bring ourselves to in sort of a physical sense with feeling the frequencies of our hands? Is it a reminder? But as we stay in that awareness, we move from being our own instrument to the more multidimensional or scalar existence. We then become, each of us, our own symphony.
Yes. You have brought Scalar up a couple of times, so I think it's important probably to define. When we think of scalar, we are releasing the idea of moving from one dimension to another dimension. They are all now simultaneous dimensions, and actually one of the ways to think about scalar is very appropriate in reconnective healing because it is perceiving one limitless dimension that is revealed in its access based on our ability to release and open, I'm going to say, the window of what we are perceiving. But I would say it's one limitless dimension.
So we don't move into the next,
No.
is what you're saying.
No.
We move into the more.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that's very important. And I will say that for reconnective healing, and specifically in the awareness of this intelligence, it is an intelligence that ultimately we become an instrument to and for. This is an important understanding in reconnective healing.
And that's part of moving from a single instrument
to
a symphony. Right. From a single instrument to a symphony. You can tell when we're still thinking in a four-dimensional way. Sometimes people will say, oh, what's next after reconnective healing? And when we step into a multidimensional, nonlinear awareness, we realize we're no longer looking for the next. We're just allowing ourselves to experience the evolutionary expansion. It's not what's next, is that there's more. And
That's a
that,
great way
to
to
me, is wonderful and very inspiringly exciting.
So we look forward to sharing more. And
we'll do that next time,
Yeah.
or next something, since there is no time or space. See you wherever, whenever.